Hi folks, this is Carly from Driving Instructors Association. I just wanted to give you a brief update on the meeting that we've had this lunchtime with Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, which was planned by DVSA to give us that opportunity in the aftermath of the communications that came out yesterday to ask them questions and give them feedback from our memberships. And give them feedback we did. The meeting involved representatives from the National Driving Schools, the National Association Strategic Partnership, organisations like ourselves, NJC and MSA, and some smaller entities representing driving instructors as well. It was very clear from that meeting that DVSA themselves have been caught very much on the back foot in these communications. There was an apology from the team there, though I don't actually think it is DVSA's responsibility necessarily to apologise for a minister who has just gone off and made all these announcements with not really much warning to DVSA, never mind the industry themselves. So they are almost playing as much catch up as we are in the industry in itself. There was an undertaking in that meeting to try and furnish us with as many questions to our answers as we provide questions to them. We had provided a few questions in advance of that meeting, so thank you so much for those of you who sent me questions over the last 24 hours. It's absolutely essential that, I am your voice, so you need to, put those things into my mouth so I can ask the questions. I don't think of every angle. You guys are the ones who are really feeling it, so you need to know exactly how, let me know how you're feeling, but also let me know the key questions that should be asked here. And there is no stupid question, because what's happened here is actually some pretty stupid decisions have been made, not necessarily in the policy changes, but actually in the way that they've communicated it. It's clear that Heidi Alexander and her team have just decided to go to Transport Select Committee yesterday and give undertakings to that Select Committee about the fact they're doing something. We're doing something here, isn't it great? We're doing something. And it's not necessarily the fact they're doing things that are going to have a massively positive impact. And they are things that are at the opportunity cost of other things that could have been done that could have had a much bigger impact. So just breaking down some of the announcements yesterday and what they're going to actually mean in real terms. Well, we're still trying to figure out what they'll make in real terms, and in terms of when will they be implemented, how far ranging are they going to be, is it going to be all England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland that will be subject to these changes? So there's questions like that haven't been thought through. But I don't think, what's been thought through is also the fact that some of these changes aren't really going to have that much of an impact. In terms of driving down test waiting times. Because if one of the headlines that I've been dealing with today in terms of my media interviews has been that focus on military examiners being deployed to do civilian tests in terms of DVSA Cat B tests, the reality is the number of examiners that are going to be deployed will only net the agency another 6,500 tests per year. They're only going to be providing 1 day's worth of testing. Now, that feels like, well, anything's a help, isn't it? No, if you're going to make radical promises about driving down waiting times, the measures themselves have got to be radical enough. And the problem through this whole waiting time scenario over the last 5 years is the measures haven't come quick enough and they've not necessarily been radical enough. However, if we do compare this latest announcement of interventions from other examiner personnel in testing process with what was a more radical measure, we can see how it's even more not necessarily a great solution. So what I'm going to compare it to is, if we're going to net 6,500 tests from just having a few military examiners in there, why didn't we actually just try and do a more radical measure like we've done before, which is to return those warrant card holders en masse to the front line? Because in comparative figures, when we did return 240 warrant card holders to the front line to do testing over that 6-month period from October 23 to April 24, there was 150,000 extra driving tests supplied to the system. So we now think, and Heidi Alexander wants us to think, she's doing something proactive by getting us 6,000 tests per year more from these military examiners. Why can't we get those warrant card holders back in bigger volumes to get us nearer 100,000 at least, or nearer 50,000 is a bit more impressive than 6,000. So, we do need to be putting pressure on these kind of questions about, well, what can you do to actually get more of those personnel who are able to test from inside the agency to the front line again, versus bringing in people from outside the agency. Now, I know they've tried things like incentive payments to make examiners do more, but those guys are broken. They're doing as much as they can actually do. And I don't think money is going to make somebody want to break themselves a little bit more. They've offered incentives to warrant card holders, but I don't think those people have necessarily come forward as volunteers in the volumes that they needed them to. Last time it was pretty much a mandate: get your fluorescent jacket on and get your iPad out and get to the front line. This time it was, can you please do it? And we'll offer you a little bit more money. And people, I think, have predominantly turn their noses up at thinking of doing that again, because they don't fancy going back out there again because of the pressure. So we've not really resolved the examiner supply issue, which is at the very heart of these issues. Frankly, I think battling the bots and third parties, he's becoming somewhat of a red herring in DVSA's attempts to deal with this problem. And it's becoming more apparent in the decisions that ministers are making that is the thing that they want to focus us on, that the bots were the problem and the third parties were the problem. And if we kick everybody else out but pupils from the booking system, we'll have resolved that big problem. But the reality is it's still the examiner resourcing and the test supply issue, which is the most worrying and kind of blocking issue here. The bots can't sell, they can't scrape, and they can't sell what they can't get hold of. So if there's not enough tests in the system, even the bots can't make any profit from that. Now, yes, the third-party scammers that don't have any tests at all and never had any tests can still do that. But, the bots can't do that. They can't scrape something that isn't there. So test supply is the biggest problem, not necessarily resolving the booking issue problems. That will help, but it also will be a disadvantage for many ADIs as well. And that impact on ADIs, that negative impact of closing off the booking system, I'm getting a very clear sense of has not been thought through very well. And that comes from the consultation itself. The responses that have been made to it have been very much rushed through. We have gone from a consultation taking place that you would naturally expect that once you had the results, they would be discussed by the key players in the industry. And given that test of whether some of the decisions that you're going to make based on those results are sound things to do and aren't going to do more harm than are going to do good, we skipped that step. And there's been an acknowledgement today that has happened. We have skipped that step where we take the results, discuss them with the industry, bulletproof the decisions that we're making and make sure they are for the best and not for the worst. And they've just gone straight to, no, we like these decisions. We, as the experts that we are in knowing what the impacts on driver trainers are going to be and on wider driver training and road safety, we as the ministers, with all that many years of delivering driver training at the coalface, and clearly I'm being sarcastic here, we know these are the right decisions, and we're not even going to bother going out to talk to anybody in the industry about whether these are the right decisions. We'll just use the consultation responses of hundreds of thousands of members of the public thought it was a good idea, never mind that we didn't actually get enough responses from ADIs. Now, I did say yesterday, we've got to take it on our own chin that maybe we didn't respond in the numbers we should have done to the consultation. But the other thing I did say to DVSA today is you do need to take a learning from that. There is apathy in the industry to responding to consultations. There is the message that we should send to people that regardless of whether you think it will change things, please have your voice. It will have an impact. And the impact that it's had by not having your voice is DVSA are now using that as a mechanism to say, well, you had your chance to say something and you didn't, so we had to go with the balance. You would have never, as an industry, reached the balance of respondents to consultation, because if the public responds in hundreds of thousands and there's only 42,000 people on the register, as I pointed out, that was never going to be a fair fight, was it? But the very fact that actually so few people responded is disappointing as an industry, but DVSA does have to take on board that people have become, over the last 5 years, very apathetic to whether change can actually occur and whether DVSA is listening. Now, DVSA's comms team were, I think, taken aback by that, because I do think they try to do their best by reaching out as much as they can and engaging with organisations like ourselves as regularly as they can. But unfortunately, it's a very clear message today for everybody that whilst they might have the best will in the world, the people who are actually making the decisions are to some degree ignoring them and totally ignoring this industry as well. So I have asked, and they have said they will also ask because they think it's a good idea. I asked Heidi Alexander and Lillian Greenwood last night. I wrote to them whether they'll actually bother replying directly to us this time, because last time they just sent Loveday Riders to tell us off for escalating our concerns to ministers. How dare we do that? We want a meeting with the ministers because we haven't had that opportunity to speak to them face to face, to make them understand that the public will vote for what the public wants. It's not necessarily what they need. It's not necessarily the fix to the ills that we're suffering in the industry at the moment. Some proper engagement with the people at the coalface of driver education who can think through the solutions with you and come up with the best solutions for all stakeholders concerned and sustainable solutions that are going to actually have an impact. You haven't really had that dialogue with yet, and we want that dialogue. So there has been an undertaking from DVSA to see if they can influence ministers to come and have that conversation. I think if you don't have that conversation now, knowing what a storm has occurred with this entire scenario because of how badly the communications have concerned, to then not engage with the industry yet again would be something that I would never want to do if I was in that position. But you can't, sometimes you can't school people who, think they've got it all right. So we're waiting for the answers to your questions to be given formally to us. There was a few responses today to the questions. I posed the questions about the communications issues. I raised the issue about the proportionality of responses, as in the public vote has in response has heavily influenced the decisions, not necessarily the ADI vote. We need to bear in mind, how can we get more ADI responses in future, and to understand why they might not want to give those responses because they don't think anything will change. I did relay some concerns that the industry has that by shutting ADIs out of the OBS, it has made some members of the public and the media. A Radio 4 presenter actually asked me this question yesterday, a producer rather, before I went on the programme. So it was the ADIs who were the third parties, right? They have taken it that shutting the ADIs out of the OBS means the ADIs were among those third parties reselling tests and doing bad things. So because the government and DVSA does not have the agility and ability to speak through broadcasters as quickly as we do, I've had to do the job of the DVSA today to try and pedal back on that. No, they're not saying it's ADIs that were the problem in terms of the third party rogue operators. They've shut down the booking system to, try and increase the security of the system as an entirety and allow only single named license holder, provisional license holder bookings to occur, which does limit the ability for the bots to scrape things and for third party reselling. However, that's a pretty key example of the mishandling of communications at its peak if you've allowed by your communication a more negative connotation to be applied to ADIs who are already pretty peed off with how you've handled the scenario anyway. So won't take much more of your time now. Just look out towards the end of this week now. We're nearly at the end of the week anyway, but towards the end of this week for a set of FAQs where the key questions that you've been relaying to me and other people have been relaying to their membership bodies will be given to us for us to publish. So keep on giving us your key questions in the meantime, because we need to throw them into the pot for them to consider if it isn't a question that's occurred to us in the meantime. And thank you for all your impacts and your feedback so far. And we'll keep communicating with you as best we can on this issue. The one thing they have said, because I did ask them, what is the impact assessment that happens now about these decisions, and how quick will these decisions actually be made? They will be having further discussions and considerations of the impacts of these decisions before they will actually go to implementation. So there is more thought going into this than actually appears, but it's still not enough thought for our money. Well, thanks folks for listening, and I hope to speak to you soon.